been understated, as our correspondent Stephen Jessel in Paris was just saying there. We're seeing pictures now of the car as it was removed from the scene. Incredible damage there. As you can see, the car is completely crushed. Witnesses after the accident reported hearing a loud bang, smoke coming from the car, and the airbags had inflated. The police have detained 5 photographers and, as far as we know, taken away 2 motorcycles for investigation. That's what we know of that from the moment. Prince Charles was informed by telephone. He is in Scotland. He was informed of the accident shortly after it happened. He's on holiday with Princes Harry and William. The Prime Minister, Tony Blair, was awakened and told. He described it as a devastating tragedy. And we've had reports from around the world of reaction of world leaders saying it at the time before this report that the Princess has died, saying what an appalling tragedy it was. There we can see the pictures and the crowds of people gathered. It happened in a very public place, going into the tunnels. Apparently it was a high-speed crash. It seems the car struck the wall of the tunnel, may have spun around several times, seems to have been pointing in the opposite direction. And of course these reports that they had been chased by the paparazzi, the press photographers travelling on motorcycles. Mohammed Al Fayed, the father of Dodi Al Fayed, Mohammed Al Fayed is the owner of Harrods in London. He is travelling to Paris in his private helicopter.
Maxine, at the international desk, for the moment, thank you very much indeed for those latest details. Just to underline, the latest information we have is that the Press Association, the British Press Association, citing unnamed British sources, has reported that Diana, Princess of Wales, has died. And the French Interior Minister, Jean-Pierre Chevènement, in Paris, who visited the hospital following the motor accident in the center of Paris, has also indicated that this is the news. I am now joined on the line by the royal correspondent of the Mirror newspaper here in Britain, James Whittaker, who has been with us one way or the other for the last 3 or 4 hours. James, this was the news that, assuming it is confirmed by Buckingham Palace, that many will have dreaded.
Absolutely. It is just awful. The words are no good on it. It is such a tragic waste of something. I feel desperately for William and Harry. Obviously, despite the divorce, they were so close to their mother. Anybody decent and caring will just be utterly choked, as I am, at what has happened. It's almost too much to take in. I feel this girl is a major part of my life. I've known her since she was 16. I'm just writing a story for my paper, The Mirror, now. I recall her when she was just 16 for the first time, seeing her. And I have seen her every moment since. I've recorded every part of her life, and it is incomprehensible. This will turn her into a saint, of course. It's just so tragic. It is a Greek tragedy times 3. You could not believe that anything like this could happen. It is too awful to contemplate.
James, obviously a very difficult moment for you personally, because not so long ago, just a few weeks ago, she came across to you and spoke to you. But can you help piece together now where the rest of her family is? Because we do understand that her former husband, Prince Charles, has been given the news at Balmoral in Scotland. Is that where the princes are at the moment?
Yes. The boys, William and Harry, who I saw just a few days ago on the banks of the River Dee giving a photo call with their father, Prince Charles, they're absolutely terrific children, these, despite this awful marriage of their parents. But they were very close to both mother and father. Deeply close to both. It must have been terrible for them. They are still, I understand, at Balmoral. in Scotland. The whole family is there, which I think is a help. The Queen's there, I think Prince Philip's there, most certainly Princess Margaret, and other members of the family. I understand that various planes have been booked from Aberdeen shortly to fly direct to Paris. Whether that will include the children, I don't know. I mean, they're very young still. William's just 15 and Harry will be 13 in a few days' time. But they are together, and everybody will feel it just so strongly. It's going to take a very long time to take in a world that doesn't include Diana. She had her detractors, Nick. You know, a lot of people in the establishment in particular were very critical of her. But she did so much good for so many people. Her life has been so difficult. It was awful. She had a terrible childhood. Her parents loathed one another. I mean, that's not too strong a word. She then got involved in a marriage that she desperately wanted. It just wasn't right. It never worked between them. Charles was in love with another woman. I don't particularly blame him. I blame him to the extent that they shouldn't have married, but she wanted that marriage as much as he did, and they both thought they could overcome it, but they couldn't. They were totally incompatible. They irritated one another, and so her married life was so ghastly. But of course, put all that aside, and two absolutely wonderful things came about through that marriage, and that shouldn't be forgotten. And I'm talking of William and Harry, and they're there, and that is absolutely tremendous. But it is a very difficult time for a lot of people right now, and the enormity of it is so great. The world is hugely influenced by what Diana has done. She's very compassionate, she was. She was great with people. I've seen her put her hands on children's heads, and she can't cure them. She didn't have healing hands, but her presence there would make these people feel better, and she would bring comfort and joy to people who were desperately sick, and she really helped them, Nick.
James,
she wasn't a doctor, but she could do this.
May I just interrupt at this very difficult moment to just recap on the information that we have, because we will have other viewers joining us at this moment. It is reported both by the British Press Association, by the Reuters news agency, and by the Interior Minister of France, Jean-Pierre Chevènement, that Diana, Princess of Wales, has died from injuries received in a car accident earlier this evening at midnight Paris time in the center of the French capital. Her companion, Dodi Al-Fayed, was reported to have been killed several hours ago in that accident, along with the driver, who was a member of staff at the Ritz Hotel. That confirmation has come from the French government, as well as several news agencies, but there is no confirmed detail or information from Buckingham Palace at this moment. We do know that Tony Blair, the British Prime Minister, was woken early to be told of the crash, and a statement for Downing Street said that he had been shocked and saddened by what he called a devastating, appalling tragedy. That was before the news in the last few minutes came through. President Clinton in the United States has been told of the accident and before the latest news had expressed concern and asked that his staff keep him informed of any developments. And we do know that the princess's former husband, Prince Charles, was given the news of the accident at Balmoral Castle in Scotland shortly after it happened. But Buckingham Palace has not yet announced any movements of Prince Charles or any other members of the royal family. James Whittaker, the royal correspondent of the Mirror newspaper, you have, as you've said, covered Princess Diana since the age of 16. That means you've known her for 18 years. I do recall a discussion we had several days ago when we were discussing the friendship of Dodi Al-Fayed and Princess Diana. And you were remarking that during this difficult time, it was likely that both princes, Prince William and Prince Harry, up at Balmoral, were not fully apprised of the public interest of what their mother had been doing.
No, that's right. They knew Dodi briefly. They had a very happy 8 or 10 days with the whole Mohammed family, Mohammed Al Fayed's family, at their villas in Saint-Tropez. It was explained to me by somebody who was present that one of the great joys for both the children and Diana was that they were in a family environment and atmosphere. Breakfast was croissant, coffee and tea, and there was people sat around the table, and it was a family environment, which apparently the children loved, and of course Diana did, because she's been on her own for some time. She's been estranged. Apart from the divorce, she was estranged from Prince of Wales for 3 or 4 years now. She didn't have family breakfasts. She ate on her own or with the children. And apparently they loved this. And the boys, of course, were indulged by the Al Fayed family. They had any amount of jet skis. They went on fabulous yachts, and they were given everything that they wanted. And that was how they knew Dodi. They knew him as a person who could provide. They're not greedy children. They didn't just want that, but it was a very happy, generous environment. They never thought, why should they, that their mother was becoming emotionally involved with Dodi. I don't believe that there was any form of misconduct, it's the wrong word, but any form of physical involvement by Diana with Dodi while the children were in Saint-Tropez. I don't believe she would have done that, and I don't think that it happened.
Could I move you on, James?
Emotionally, Diana was becoming more and more involved with Dodi.
Could I just move you on to Prince William and Prince Harry up at Balmoral? Could you explain the reasons for them being in Balmoral with their father, Prince Charles, during this summer period?
Oh, yes. There are very set-down dates as to when the children are with either parent. This is decided months in advance, most likely last December, at a rather dreary clerical committee meeting. It would be said that Diana would have the children from the day they left school, end of June, beginning of July. She would have them more or less for the month of July. There would then be a specific date, even time, as to when the children should then be transferred into the care and control of their father. That would happen almost certainly with bodyguards collecting the boys and taking them from one location to another. It would then be said that Charles would be in charge of the children until, say, August 31 or even September 1. Then they would go, William in particular would briefly go back to Diana to be looked after until he went back to Eton, which takes place next Wednesday, I think it is, September 3 anyway. And so it would be very clearly defined, and we're in a period just now when it was the turn of the children to be with their father. And of course the same applies at Christmas and Easter and everything. If one of the parents wished to have the children for an extra day or two or whatever because there were special circumstances, the other parent would not stand in the way, and it would all be very amicable. The one great thing between the Waleses and the children was that there was never any animosity between them involving the children. They were foremost in their thoughts and consideration at all times.
James, we did, as you said, see both princes twice up in Balmoral with Prince Charles. They were making something of a public statement by agreeing to appear publicly at Balmoral during this summer holiday.
It was partly a public statement, but it was mainly, funny enough, it involved photographers again. They agreed to give these photo calls. One was on a Tuesday and then the following one on the Saturday for the Sunday newspapers. The Tuesday was the dailies and television, I have to say. And there were a number of crews there, both from the UK and overseas. CNN were there, and I think there was an Australian crew there. And the idea was that if this facility were given, which it was, then the paparazzi, the British ones nearly always in this case, would disappear from Balmoral, just leave the area and allow the Queen and the rest of her family, including the children, Prince Charles, to carry on with their holidays, so that every time they came round a corner, they would not find a photographer lurking in some piece of heather or something, so there would be peace. I thought that was a very sensible compromise. It worked well. The photos were delightful. William came across as very shy. He was very uncomfortable with photographers. He had seen them make his mother cry far too often, so he didn't like photographers, but he was gracious, and he's a very good-looking boy, and it was a very successful 2 photo calls. As a result of that, I do know that all the photographers, even the ones who would have expected to be there for most of the period they were in residence at Balmoral, did leave the area, and they were then allowed to continue their holiday. So that was the main purpose, rather than a show of state. But they don't bother with proving that Charles adores his children and vice versa. They just wouldn't have done that.
James Whittaker, the royal correspondent of the Mirror newspaper in Britain, thank you very much indeed for sharing those thoughts with us. Now, we can report that the British Foreign Secretary Robin Cook, speaking in the Philippines, has just confirmed that Diana, Princess of Wales, has died following the car crash at midnight in Paris. The Foreign Secretary said, "I am greatly shocked by this news. Our first thoughts must be with her children and family at this time of immense loss to them." The British Press Association has reported that the Princess died at 4 a.m. after a cardiac arrest. The accident happened late at night in a road tunnel which carries an expressway under a bridge at the Place de l'Alma across the River Seine from the Eiffel Tower. Reports say a vehicle carrying the princess and her entourage was being chased by photographers. Police say the chauffeur of the car was killed, as well as her companion, the millionaire film producer Dodi Al-Fayed. He was the son of Mohammed Al-Fayed, the owner of the Harrods store in London. Several hours after the accident, French emergency services were still at the scene, cutting people from the wreckage. That is the car in which they were traveling. The princess was taken for emergency treatment to the intensive care unit at the Pitié-Salpêtrière hospital in southeast Paris. French police detained 5 press photographers for questioning about the events that led up to the crash. Well, having made that announcement from Manila, the capital of the Philippines, we await further announcements. None of this detail has yet been confirmed by Buckingham Palace here in London. Well, we can now go to our media correspondent, Nick Higham, who joins me from one of our other studios. Nick, the issue we've been discussing with you and others, of course, is the involvement of photographers in what now appears to have been a multiple fatal crash in which Princess Diana was killed. How difficult is this going to be for the press?
It's going to be extremely difficult for the press. They have never been popular with the royal family, and particularly with Princess Diana, who in recent years in particular used to feel that they were hounding her. There have been a number of ugly scenes and altercations in streets and so on when she's been pursued or hounded or stalked by usually groups of paparazzi, sometimes just 1 or 2 working by themselves. And the press are equally unpopular with other celebrities and stars in the public eye, because Hollywood stars, pop stars, can find themselves getting the same sort of treatment. Now, this is going to make things very difficult, particularly, I think, for the paparazzi. One has to distinguish here between, on the one hand, newspapers and magazines, the people who publish stories and photographs, and on the other, the paparazzi who take them. I think this is going to give the paparazzi, who have a bad name already, an even worse name.
Can you just enlighten us on the relationship that Princess Diana did have? Because here we had, as we were discussing with our royal correspondent Paul Reynolds earlier, she found herself, certainly since her divorce, in a grey area, both in terms of security and how much she wanted to run her private life.
Yes, I mean, it's a cliche, but she had something of a love-hate relationship with the media. She used to object horribly to the way she was stalked and pursued. At the same time, she was well aware of her own publicity value. She was well aware of the attraction that she had for editors who found that putting Diana's photograph on the cover would increase sales. She knew full well that the paparazzi could expect tens, even hundreds of thousands of dollars for photographs. One North American magazine paid $200,000 for the photographs of her and Dodi Al-Fayed on a yacht in the Mediterranean. Now, all of this meant, I think, that she was sometimes rather schizophrenic in her dealings with the media, because at the same time as complaining about the photographers, she did have some favored journalists whom she would talk to and whom she would meet and give stories to. And she was also capable of using her public image to get publicity for worthy causes. She was associated with a number of charities, and of course most recently she's been associated with a campaign against landmines. And she knew perfectly well that if she went to southern Africa, she went to Bosnia, then the photographers would go too, and the issue of landmines and what to do about them, from being something that had rumbled on, that had concerned governments, that had concerned peace campaigners for many years, would suddenly get onto the front pages and onto the news bulletins around the world, and so it proved. So she was quite capable of using her celebrity, whilst at the same time, like other people in the same position, finding it very, very difficult personally to cope with the harassment that went with it.
If I may, Nick, at this moment, can I just recap on the status of the information we have on that news that we have at the bottom of the screen, and why we are discussing the role of the media in the reported death of Princess Diana. She was traveling in a car just before midnight in Paris, the French capital, along with her companion, Dodi Al-Fayed, and they were involved in an incident in which the driver was killed as well. Dodi Al-Fayed was confirmed as dead by the French police shortly afterwards. Princess Diana herself was taken to a hospital close by. This location is just north of the Seine in central Paris, and it has been confirmed by the British Foreign Secretary Robin Cook in the last few minutes, speaking in Manila, the capital of the Philippines, that Diana, Princess of Wales, died following the car crash. And it is understood that she died at 4 o'clock in the morning. The Foreign Secretary has said that he is greatly shocked by this news, and added that our first thoughts must be with her children and family at this time of immense loss to them. We know that the British Prime Minister has been informed of the accident, that President Clinton has been informed, that Prince Charles, her former husband, has been informed. He is in Balmoral in northeast Scotland. This is the location in Paris. This is BBC Television from London. A short while ago, Buckingham Palace confirmed the death of Diana, Princess of Wales. The princess died following a car accident in Paris. She was 36. A statement issued by the palace says the Queen and the Prince of Wales are deeply shocked and distressed by the terrible news. BBC Television will bring you more information as we receive it. This is BBC Television from London. A short while ago, Buckingham Palace confirmed the death of Diana, Princess of Wales. The princess died following a car accident in Paris. She was 36. A statement issued by the palace says the Queen and the Prince of Wales are deeply shocked and distressed by the terrible news. BBC Television will bring you more information as we receive it. I'm now joined by our media correspondent Nick Higham, who joins me from another of our studios. We have confirmation there from Buckingham Palace, Nick.
Yes, we do, and it will come, I think, as a considerable shock and a surprise to everybody, and I think for the newspapers, for the media, she was a woman who lived her entire adult life as in the spotlight of media attention. She was someone who alternately courted and sometimes tried to avoid media scrutiny and the attentions of the press, but she was an instantly recognizable figure and face. I think she was someone who was probably had some claim to be the most famous individual in the world. Her photographs so often appearing in newspapers, magazines, pictured on television around the world. And the fact that the media are being indirectly blamed, potentially blamed for having some part in her death because it's thought that she was being chased by a group of paparazzi, freelance commercial photographers on motorbikes, and that it's possible that the car she was in was being driven very fast to escape them. That fact, I'm afraid, will put the spotlight very firmly on photographers, newspapers, magazines in France, in Britain and around the world, and will undoubtedly make for a very uncomfortable period for the newspapers and media who crave celebrity, who feed off celebrity, who make the lives of people like Princess Diana so difficult.
Nick Higham, I have to interrupt you there because on the line from Manila, the capital of the Philippines, I have our diplomatic correspondent Nicholas Witchell, who is travelling with the British Foreign Secretary Robin Cook in the Philippines, and he joins me now. Nicholas, tell me what the Foreign Secretary and his officials have been telling you and reporting following the news from Paris.
Robin Cook, looking extremely somber, of course, is an entirely inadequate word in the circumstances. We are aboard his plane, which is leaving in a few moments, but a few minutes ago he came down the steps of the plane to issue a statement in which he said he was greatly shocked at the news from Paris. His first thoughts were with the princess's family, and he then went on to pay tribute to the work of Diana, Princess of Wales. He called this a tragic loss at a young age of someone who had shown great courage and commitment in drawing attention to serious issues. Those issues, of course, among them the question of landmines, on which the princess had recently had meetings with Mr. Cook. And the Foreign Secretary went on to say that in the next few days the nation must have time to come to terms with this great loss and their immense sadness. And then after that, Mr. Cook said, serious questions would have to be asked whether what he called the aggressive intrusion into her privacy had in any way contributed to this tragedy.
Nick, you will be aware that the British ambassador in Paris, Sir Michael Jay, went to the hospital very soon after the accident. Do you know if the Foreign Secretary was able to speak with him?
His officials have certainly been in touch with the British ambassador in Paris. Now, my understanding of what occurred in Paris, at the hospital there, is that the princess survived the crash, but that she arrived at hospital with major injuries, particularly major chest injuries. French doctors operated on her, but during the course, or perhaps shortly after that operation, at 4 o'clock Paris time, the princess died after suffering a massive heart attack.
Nicholas Witchell, on the plane of the Foreign Secretary Robin Cook in Manila, the capital of the Philippines. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. And Buckingham Palace has now confirmed the death of Diana, Princess of Wales. The princess died following a car crash in Paris. A statement from Buckingham Palace said the Queen and the Prince of Wales were deeply shocked and distressed by this terrible news. The French Prime Minister Lionel Jospin has said he is deeply moved by the accident. His statement followed the confirmation of her death by the British Foreign Secretary Robin Cook. Speaking in the Philippines, as we've just heard from our diplomatic correspondent, the Foreign Secretary said, "I am greatly shocked by this news. Our first thoughts must be with her children and her family at this time of immense loss to them." The British Press Association reports that the Princess died at 4 a.m. after suffering a cardiac arrest. The accident happened late at night in a road tunnel which carries an expressway under a bridge at the Place d'Alma across the River Seine from the Eiffel Tower. Reports say a vehicle carrying the princess and her entourage was being chased by photographers. Police say the chauffeur of the car was killed, as well as her companion, the millionaire film producer Dodi Al Fayed. He was the son of Mohammed Al Fayed, the owner of the Harrods store in London. Several hours after the accident, French emergency services were still at the scene, cutting people from the wreckage. The princess was taken for emergency treatment to the intensive care unit at the Pitié-Salpêtrière hospital in southeast Paris. French police detained 5 press photographers for questioning about the events that led up to the crash. And as we heard from our diplomatic correspondent, it's reported that the princess died at 4 a.m. I'm now rejoined from another of our studios by our media correspondent, Nick Higham. Nick, we have to raise this question of the press and their role in this, because not because we are raising it as an issue, because the Foreign Secretary, the British Foreign Secretary, Robin Cook, has gone out of his way to say during his visit to Manila, the capital of the Philippines, that in his words, serious questions must now be asked about what he called the aggressive intrusion of some members of the press.
That's right, and indeed earlier this evening also the spokesman for Buckingham Palace said that if the paparazzi were involved here, if photographers chasing the princess had had a hand in it, it was an accident waiting to happen because of the tensions that arise. And already this evening we've also heard Tom Cruise, the American actor, who has someone who knows Dodi Fayed and Princess Diana personally, along with his wife Nicole Kidman. He too has condemned the behavior of press photographers, and I think there is a widespread view that something needs to be done. It's very difficult to know quite what to do. Some countries, France is one, have privacy laws which effectively prevent publication of articles which people don't like, which intrude into people's private lives. But of course, the French magazines turn out to be one of the best markets for the sort of photographs that we've seen in recent weeks of the Princess and Dodi Fayed. Here in Britain, we have no privacy laws, but we do have a voluntary code of practice which our newspapers adhere to, which says again that one shouldn't intrude as a newspaper or a journalist into a person's private life. But very often that code is either broken in the letter or in the spirit. And in other countries, the press are very much free to do what they like. The problem is that paparazzi, commercial freelance photographers, spend a great deal of time chasing after celebrities because they know that the pictures will fetch large amounts of money. They'll go for an enormous amount in syndication in magazines and newspapers around the world. And even if newspapers and magazines in one country or another don't buy them for some reason, there are plenty of other countries that will. You have here a free market. It's very difficult indeed to stamp out this business of harassment and stalking and platoons of photographers following around after celebrities.
It's important to emphasize, isn't it, Nick, that this is a freelance issue, an issue of freelancers who decide to, as you put it, stalk leading figures in this kind of way, particularly in places like Paris on motor scooters and motorbikes, where they can move at incredibly high speeds in order to get their story, as they put it. But what was interesting talking to James Whittaker, the royal correspondent of the Mirror newspaper, who has followed Diana for 18 years, known her for that time, he made clear that his editor, Piers Morgan, offered some of these images, simply would never publish them in the British press.
Yes, you do, as I say, you have to distinguish between, on the one hand, the activities of the photographers on the ground, who are for the most part freelancers, and on the other, the activities of the newspapers and their staff reporters and photographers. Now, it's not always the case that British tabloid newspapers have turned down photographs like this. I can remember some years ago James Whittaker himself and a photographer stalking the princess in the early years of her marriage when she was pregnant with her first child in order to get photographs, snatched photographs with a long lens of her in a bikini while pregnant on a beach in the Caribbean. There has been in Britain a marked change in recent years and an awareness that this sort of thing is perhaps undesirable and shouldn't be encouraged. But the difficulty is regulating the commercial freelance paparazzi. These are individuals who know that somewhere in the world they can find somebody to pay them a lot of money for these photographs, and for that reason they'll go on trying to get them.
It mustn't be seen distasteful to be discussing this, because the British Foreign Secretary has raised this issue personally, talking about aggressive intrusion. Of course, thoughts will go out to the Queen, the Prince of Wales, and her two sons this time. But can you imagine that this really is now going to overshadow what is going to be a time of immense heart-searching here in Britain?
Yes, I think it will be an important issue. It may not overshadow the mourning for the princess and the looking back on her life and the many things that she's done with her life, but it will undoubtedly be something which is much talked about and will stimulate debate, not least because she was herself such a media figure. She was a celebrity. She knew she was a celebrity. She behaved as a celebrity. She alternately made overtures to and put up barriers against the press and photographers, and she used, particularly at the time of her marriage breakup, she used the press, briefed journalists, briefed a biographer, Andrew Morton, or at least allowed her friends to brief a biographer, Andrew Morton, in order, as she would put it, to tell her side of the story. And the royal family in general, I'm afraid, in recent years has found that its personal relations have often been exposed in British newspapers and the newspapers and magazines around the world. So for someone who lived so much in the media spotlight, I think inevitably the spotlight will be on the media now, given the manner of her death.
But I used in my previous question, Nick, the issue of heart-searching as well as accusations against the press. It's a very difficult balance, isn't it? Particularly as we heard from our court correspondent, Paul Reynolds, earlier. She did live in what he described as a grey area when it came to security and privacy, and we heard from James Whittaker at times that she was courting the press and the photographers in a way which almost made them feel as if they should keep doing what they did, even though many, including herself at some moments, found it very difficult to cope with.
Yes, that's right. I mean, many of the photographers and reporters who followed her will say, if asked, well, we think she was posing for us. You may look at a photograph and say that was taken from a long distance with a long lens, but actually she knew we were there all along and she was putting on a show for us. So there was a certain amount of special pleading. You use the word heart-searching, and I take it you're considering what the reaction will be in newsrooms, newspaper newsrooms around the world, magazine offices. And there, I think, undoubtedly there will be a certain amount of heart-searching. But you have to remember that in the West, newspapers and magazines are commercial enterprises. They exist to make money. To do that, they need to sell copies. Princess Diana and a small number of other celebrities, mostly American music and film stars, are instantly recognizable faces around the world, and they do sell newspapers and magazines, and there is a huge and powerful commercial incentive on the part of editors to use pictures of these people however they were got. And I think quite often editors would prefer not to know the circumstances in which a photograph was taken. They just say, that's fine, we'll run it. So I'm not sure how much heart-searching there'll be.
Nick Higham, we'll be with you in a moment again, but we need now to return to Paris, where the British ambassador, Sir Michael Jay, a short moment ago, made this statement.
Tonight's accident is a terrible tragedy. The death of the Princess of Wales fills us all with deep shock and with deep grief. And our thoughts and our prayers are with her family and her friends, and with the family and friends of the others who died in the accident. The Queen and the Prince of Wales and the Prime Minister have been informed of the accident and of the death of the Princess of Wales. I should like to take this opportunity to thank the Minister and the French authorities and the medical team here at this hospital for all they have done tonight at the time of this terrible tragedy. Thank you.
Sir Michael Jay, the British ambassador in Paris, speaking a short time ago, confirming the death of Diana, Princess of Wales, following a motor accident in the French capital just before midnight. Well, I'm now rejoined on the line from Paris by our correspondent, Stephen Jessel. Stephen, we heard there from the British ambassador, Sir Michael Jay. AFP, the French news agency, is reporting that Princess Diana died of a lung hemorrhage after surgery, and they are quoting the surgeon in the intensive care unit at the Pitié-Salpêtrière hospital.
Yes, the initial reports, which were clearly misleading, suggested that she was suffering from a broken arm, a concussion, and lacerations to her thigh. It now appears that her rib cage, her chest, was very badly injured, crushed during the accident. That might have been expected from the state of the car, which was very badly damaged. And there was an operation to try to improve her circulation, her breathing, but that was unsuccessful. And my understanding is that she died around 4 o'clock in the morning, local time here, which would be slightly under 4 hours after the accident.
It would have been hard to imagine her coming out of the kind of damaged car and the kind of devastation we are seeing to the car in the tunnel.
Yes.
Given that the roof was crashed and the bonnet was severely smashed as well.
Yes, I mean, there were 4 people in the car. The 4th person, the bodyguard, does still appear to be alive. There's no detail. He's reported to be quite badly injured, but there's no suggestion that he's gravely injured at the moment. But clearly the initial reports that the princess had escaped relatively likely were just plain wrong. It has to be said that there was very little communication coming out from anyone, whether it be the police, the ambulance, or anybody else, in the hours that immediately followed the crash. We now know that she was very badly injured, and unfortunately she did not survive more than about 3.5 hours after the accident.
Now, it is reported from Paris by the agency Agence France-Presse that Lionel Jospin, the French Prime Minister, has said he has been deeply moved by the death, which was the news of which was passed to him, and he has now said he's returning to Paris from La Rochelle to pay tribute to both the Princess and Dodi El Fayed.
Yes, more, I suspect, to the than Mr. El Fayed. He has, as you say, he's been attending a socialist summer school, what they call Université d'été, kind of miniature political conference down there. He would have been coming back to Paris anyway, but it appears that he's bringing his departure forward so he can pay his respects. We don't know at what point the princess's body will be returned to the United Kingdom. That would be the logical thing to happen in the hours ahead. But this is obviously a very grave moment, and although the princess had no particular connection with France, other than the fact that she spent quite a lot of time here in recent months, I think it's felt appropriate that her death should be marked by some formal display of mourning by the French government.
Now, Stephen, I have to put this to you as I did to Nick Hyam, our media correspondent here in London just a few minutes ago, shortly after the news was confirmed by Buckingham Palace. The Foreign Secretary, the British Foreign Secretary, Robin Cook, who's in the Far East at the moment, in Manila, the capital of the Philippines, actually made a point of saying in his statement that serious questions will have to be asked about what he called the aggressive intrusion of the press and whether that contributed in any way to this accident and the princess's death. This, of course, is in many ways a reference to the British approach. We have discussed in the last 4 hours on a couple of occasions the issue in France. For those who are just joining us, how do you think this might impact on what is an accepted form of journalism in France?
Well, celebrities are regarded as fair game in France. This is a little paradoxical in as much as French law is extremely restrictive about what you can publish about people. You own your image in France, and in theory, if you don't want your photograph or a picture of you published, then you're entitled under the law to say so. And although there are magazines that regularly flout this, they are taken to court, they are fined. The problem is they're not fined very much. So
but what about the political impact, Stephen? This has now happened.
I don't think there'll be any political impact at all, to tell you the truth, to be honest with you. I think it will be regarded as an immense tragedy. I suspect paparazzi seen around the place may get a very frosty reception for a while from people who will hold them responsible for the death of the Diana, Princess of Wales. But these are hard-bitten, cynical, extremely tough people who can, under the right circumstances, make an awful lot of money. And I don't think there will be a lasting impact. It has to be said that one of the first things after the accident that appears to have happened is one of the paparazzi who'd been chasing the car went up to it and started photographing it. It doesn't suggest to me an awfully strong sense of conscience there.
Stephen Jessel, our correspondent in Paris, thank you very much indeed for joining us. The news then is that Buckingham Palace has confirmed the death of Diana, Princess of Wales. The princess died following a car crash in Paris. A statement from Buckingham Palace said the Queen and the Prince of Wales were deeply shocked and distressed by this terrible news. The British Prime Minister Tony Blair said, "I am utterly devastated. The whole of our country, all of us, will be in a state of shock and mourning." The Prime Minister of France, Lionel Jospin, said he was deeply moved by the accident. The French Interior Minister, Jean-Pierre Chevènement, sent condolences to the royal family. Doctors at the hospital in Paris, where she was being treated, said the princess died at 4 o'clock in the morning after suffering a lung hemorrhage. The accident happened late at night in a road tunnel which carries an expressway under a bridge at the Place de l'Alma across the River Seine from the Eiffel Tower. Reports say a vehicle carrying the princess and her entourage was being chased by photographers. Police say the chauffeur of the car was also killed, as well as her companion, the millionaire film producer Dodi Al Fayed. He was the son of Mohammed Al Fayed, the owner of the Harrods store in London. Several hours after the accident, French emergency services were still at the scene, cutting people from the wreckage. The princess was taken for emergency treatment to the intensive care unit at the Pitié-Salpêtrière hospital in southeast Paris. French police detained 5 press photographers for questioning about the events that led up to the crash. Diana, Princess of Wales, has been killed in a car crash early on Sunday. She was 36. Her close friend Dodi Al Fayed and the driver of the car were also killed. From the time of the royal engagement in 1981, Diana became a much-loved member of the British royal family, both at home and abroad. Even after her divorce from the Prince of Wales in August 1996, Diana remained a hugely popular figure, both at home and abroad. The couple had 2 sons during their marriage, Princes William and Harry.
Diana Frances Spencer was born a commoner, though with strong royal connections. Her family were living on the Queen's estate at Sandringham, where her father, a future Earl Spencer, had rented Park House. Yet her privileged childhood was an insecure one. She was 6 when her sisters went away to school and her parents decided to split up. The children became pawns in a bitter custody dispute. Lady Diana was sent to boarding school, eventually attending Westheath Public School in Kent. Here she excelled at sport, particularly swimming. Lady Diana's naturally shy manner hid a wry sense of humour and an easy way with people. Children were especially charmed by her. A regular Pied Piper, said one member of her family. She worked in London, first as a nanny, occasionally as a cook, and then as an assistant at the Young England kindergarten in Knightsbridge.
I wanted to teach children, and they said, why not come along? So I first started off doing afternoons, and then I took over the mornings and did whole days. But I only worked 3 days a week at kindergarten, and the other 2 I looked after American baby boy.
Her parents had divorced, and there was a new Countess Spencer, daughter of the romantic novelist Barbara Cartland. But soon it was Diana who was to become the celebrated member of the family. Rumour spread that her friendship with the Prince of Wales was blossoming into something more serious. Press and television besieged her at every turn. The palace tried in vain to play down speculation. And on the 24th of February 1981, the engagement became official. The wedding took place at St. Paul's on a perfect July day. Millions of television viewers around the world were dazzled by the event. Diana was just 20. And so the royal family welcomed a newcomer to its midst. It was the love story that brought crowds onto the streets again. They came to see the Queen, of course, and the Prince, but most of all, they came to see her. But the seemingly perfect fairy tale was destined not to have a storybook ending. From the moment their relationship had begun, doubts had been expressed over the long-term prospects of a marriage between two people who appeared to have little in common and whose age gap was nearly 13 years. Even by the end of their honeymoon, Diana had developed the eating disorder bulimia and was feeling confused and neglected by Charles. Within a year of her marriage, she gave birth to a son, William. William became the first male heir to go to kindergarten. From the time of her dazzling appearance on her first public engagement with her then husband-to-be, Diana's wardrobe became a continual focus of attention. The publication of the book Diana, Her True Story by Andrew Morton blew the lid off the whole story. The book, based on interviews with some of the princess's closest friends and written with the tacit approval of the princess herself, confirmed that her relationship with the Prince of Wales was cold and distant. It told of half-hearted suicide attempts by the princess during the early years of the marriage, and of her obsession with the belief that Charles continued to love a woman he'd fallen for years before, Camilla Parker Bowles. The prince later confirmed that he and Camilla had had an extramarital affair. Charles and Diana officially separated in December that year.
It is announced from Buckingham Palace that with regret, the Prince and Princess of Wales have decided to separate. Their Royal Highnesses have no plans to divorce, and their constitutional positions are unaffected.
Despite the ensuing furore, public affection for the Princess of Wales remained strong. She had chosen to accept a public role at the hard end of charity work. She was troubled by the problems faced by young people. Here she set the royal seal of approval on a television campaign designed to beat the drugs menace. She urged employers, on behalf of the charity Turning Point, to accept a moral responsibility for their workforce in helping them combat the cause and effects of drug and alcohol addiction.
We must remember then that the majority of Turning Point's clients come from ordinary communities. Very few of them resemble a stereotype junkie or drunk.
The plight of suffering children was a cause close to her heart. She was a regular welcome visitor to the Great Ormond Street Hospital for Sick Children in London and was patron of several children's charities. While her husband concentrated on the philosophy and practices of the modern world, Diana homed in on the individual. Abroad, too, Diana was proud to publicize the plight of the unfortunate and the rejected. On a visit to Indonesia in 1989, she was praised for publicly shaking hands with lepers, dispelling widely held myths about the disease. Her contributions, as in a revealing speech about those with eating disorders, were often informed by her own experiences.
From early childhood, many had felt they were expected to be perfect, but didn't feel they had the right to express their true feelings to those around them. Feelings of guilt, of self-revulsion and low personal esteem, creating in them a compulsion to dissolve like a disprin and disappear.
The Princess of Wales began by bringing a breath of fresh air and a measure of glamour into the House of Windsor. But she became a sad figure to many as the story of her failed marriage unravelled. Her critics blamed her for helping to strip the monarchy of some of the mystique so important for its survival. But the Princess of Wales' unflagging support for the sick and disadvantaged earned her continued respect, and to the end she remained a figure of public fascination and affection.
That tribute for Diana, Princess of Wales. Buckingham Palace has confirmed the death of Diana, Princess of Wales. The Princess died following a car crash in Paris. A statement from Buckingham Palace said the Queen and the Prince of Wales were deeply shocked and distressed by this terrible news. The British Prime Minister Tony Blair said, "I am utterly devastated. The whole of our country, all of us, will be in a state of shock and mourning." The Prime Minister of France, Lionel Jospin, said he was deeply moved by the accident. The French Interior Minister Jean-Pierre Chevènement sent condolences to the royal family. Doctors at the hospital in Paris, where she was being treated, said the princess died at 4 o'clock in the morning after suffering a lung hemorrhage. The accident happened late at night in a road tunnel which carries an expressway under a bridge at the Place de l'Alma across the River Seine. Reports say a vehicle carrying the princess and her entourage was being chased by photographers. Well, I'm now joined live from Paris, again by our correspondent Stephen Jessel. Actually, it's Kevin Connolly, I do apologize. Kevin, what is the latest information that you have following the announcement from the British Ambassador, Sir Michael Jay?
Well, really, there's very little new information, Nick. More, I think, a growing sense in a city numbed almost with disbelief rather than shock that this really has happened. The Princess of Wales really has died here in these terrible and tragic circumstances, and people really are still coming to terms, I think, with that basic fact, rather than searching for new information. As I said, there's been a growing sense, really, of disbelief, more than shock, I think, throughout the small hours of the morning, where a small group of journalists and photographers had been keeping a vigil outside the hospital.
Kevin, we can talk about the location in which this accident took place around midnight, your time. Could you describe it to us?
Yes, it's a long stretch of roadway that runs parallel to the River Seine, and a series of tunnels carry it under bridges. And it's at this time of the year, August, Paris is very quiet. At that time of night, there's very little traffic on the roads, of course, so traffic does tend to be fast-flowing. We do understand, though, that a crucial factor in the accident, as you said, was the behavior of a posse of paparazzi photographers who had been chasing the car, searching, as always, of course, at the Princess of Wales for pictures. We understand that 7 of those photographers who were involved in the chase are now being questioned by police.
Now, we have to raise that issue even after this tragic news, because the British Foreign Secretary Robin Cook, who's on a visit to the Far East, who's in Manila, the capital of the Philippines, or was when he made the statement, he's just left. He, having paid tribute to Diana, Princess of Wales, said, quote, that serious questions would now have to be asked about what he called aggressive intrusion by the press. You're in Paris. He was probably talking more about Britain. What do you think the questions will be, if at all, in France?
Well, there will be, I think, a worldwide wave of revulsion and anger. This is, of course, the reality behind the photographs you see in your tabloid newspapers, news magazines, of figures like the Princess of Wales. This is how they are got, in that very aggressive, very, very competitive way. The French press actually have very strict privacy laws in many ways, governing how public figures must be treated, but the paparazzi have always seemed almost a law unto themselves, operating on the very edges of what is considered legally acceptable in France. I think that it's a very deep-rooted tradition here, and it will be interesting to see whether there's real pressure for it to change in the light of this terrible accident. But certainly, I think there will be angry scrutiny, not just in France, but in Britain and perhaps other parts of the world too, of the way in which public figures like the Princess of Wales are essentially hounded by people looking for exclusive pictures.
Kevin, emotions at this kind of time are one thing, but in the end you will have to look at, say, the political reality in France, because it needs laws to be passed if anyone is going to turn emotion into something more long-lasting. Being realistic, and given the history of the French press, particularly these freelance photographers who zoom around Paris on motorbikes and so on, do you really see a political consensus emerging in France, particularly, that something should be done about this?
Well, it's going to be very difficult, and I think certainly in the first wave of shock of the death of the princess, there will be enormous public pressure. I think the first clue as to what's going to happen in the slightly longer term in France will be what happens to the 7 photographers involved in this incident, how they will be treated by the law, and what sort of punishment they will be given if they're brought to court.
There is, though, this ability in France to use what's called the freedom of the image, but there is, as you were mentioning earlier, this ability then to take action. Can you see that changing? Can you see this becoming a political issue or merely a legal issue as to whether these photographers, if any of them are charged, actually even broke French law?
Well, I think the way in which this will be perceived around the world will be keenly felt by the French government, so it won't just be a legal issue, it will be a political issue. But of course, it is a very complex matter on which to legislate, and the subtleties of that, I think, are for another day. As I say, this is a day of disbelief and shock in Paris, and certainly I think as the days go by and the shock begins to sink in, then there will be pressure for something to be done.
We've been talking with some of our other correspondents in the last few hours about the kind of way that Princess Diana has been conducting her life, and certainly